Fantastic. Hello, everybody in person, and hello, everybody on Zoom. We're going to get started. Welcome to the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. Whether you're in person or on Zoom, we're really excited to welcome you to this presentation tonight. And we're so thankful for Corie to getting here to New Orleans. We know that weather in this area, in this country right now is a little bit wonky. And so thank you so much for making it down here. I'm going to give a few quick little pieces of background information, and then we'll get started with this talk. The first, for people in person, we just ask that you keep your conversations to a minimum. People on Zoom, we ask that you remain muted. If you're talking on Zoom, I guess I can't hear you as long as you're muted. But if you have questions, we will have ample time for questions at the end. Zoom participants, go ahead and pop those questions in the chat. People in person will raise their hands. There will be a recording of this presentation available. So I anticipate it will be fantastic and you'll want to share it with your friends and family. And so tomorrow and the coming days, there will be a recording posted to YouTube. Following this presentation, there will be a book signing in person. If you're online and want to purchase a book, I will pop that a link in the chat to our museum store. So you can buy The Marriage Box and Life and Other Shortcomings, Corie's 2 books, and you can read along with us. So to keep going, to get going, I want to introduce Corie. Corie Adjmi is the best-selling, award-winning author of the novel The Marriage Box and the short story collection Life and Other Shortcomings. She has won a number of international book awards, American Fiction Awards, Best Book Awards, and an IBPA Benjamin Franklin Award. The Jewish Chronicle included The Marriage Box on a list of best Jewish books, and Corie's prize-winning essays and short stories have appeared in dozens of journals and magazines, including HuffPost, Newsweek, North American Review, Indiana Review, Medium, Motherwell, and Feller. When Corie is not writing, she does volunteer work, cooks, draws, bikes, and hikes. She and her husband have 5 children and a number of grandchildren, with more on the way. She lives and works in New York City. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Corie Adjmi to the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you to all the people on Zoom, and thank you so much to the museum for having me here. I cannot believe I'm here. The weather was so bad in New York, and I was on the phone with Lizzie all day trying to decide if I was going to get here or not. Should we do this by Zoom? Well, I think it has to do with my perseverance, because I don't know if you guys know this, if you saw it online anywhere, but it took me 20 years to write The Marriage Box. So I'm really figuring out about myself that I'm very determined. And also, I don't let my dreams fall away, because I needed to write this book and I needed to come do book talks in New Orleans, and here I am. I can't believe it. Very nerve-wracking day. So a lot of you might know that the premise of The Marriage Box is based on my real life. I did grow up in New Orleans. My family moved when I was 16 to Brooklyn to live amongst the Syrian Jewish community. And I didn't know much about the community at that time. I didn't know anything about my Sephardic background. I didn't know anything about Orthodox Judaism. We grew up Reform here. And it was quite a bit of culture shock. So and the other expectation that also was kind of surprising to me was that my family did want me to get married super young, and the expectation was around 18. So I swore I wouldn't do it, but I did. And that is what The Marriage Box is based on. The rest of the book is fiction. But I thought I'd read the prologue just to give you a little bit of a flavor of the book, and then we'll go on with the talk after that. All good?
I'm just going to keep that there for the camera.
Okay. All right. The night started out like every Syrian Jewish wedding. The florist pinned white orchids around the huppah. Caterers folded yarmulkes into black half moons. A photographer snapped our picture, me, 18 years old, in a high-necked, long-sleeved, Victorian-style wedding gown, nails polished rubble red, and Tracy, my best friend, in off-white satin, neckline plunging enough to make people stare. Casey, you don't have to do this, you know, Tracy said. While I'd spent the summer shopping for my trousseau and planning my wedding, Tracy had spent the summer getting ready for college, where she'd bar hop and dodge unwanted pregnancies. Now and then she'd study. She couldn't understand why I was adhering to my family's expectations, marrying a Syrian Jew, shopping at Tiffany's for wine and water glasses, contentedly testing chicken and eggplant recipes dashed with allspice. Smile, the photographer instructed. Tracy looped her arm around my back. You might as well smile now while you're still happy. We posed in front of a 6-foot golden Jewish star. Why can't you just live with him like every other normal American girl? This isn't 1882 Aleppo. It's 1982 America. This isn't America, I said. It's Brooklyn. In the few years since my family had moved from New Orleans, returning to our roots in Brooklyn, I'd learned the hard way there were rules. A teenage girl was taught to dress for seduction, but was forbidden to have premarital sex. She couldn't date until she was 16, but had to be married by 18. And she certainly couldn't live with a man unless she was his wife. And what's with your dress, Tracy went on. Why'd you pick something so virginal? She used her fingers to form a halo over her head and smiled, posing for the camera. Hands on her hips, she looked at me. You're doing exactly what you swore you wouldn't do. You said you didn't want to be like your mother, who went straight from her father's house into her husband's. You said you didn't want to be like the other Syrian girls who got married before they were of legal drinking age, before they had a driver's license. I have my license, I said, turning from Tracy. The guests from New Orleans scoped out the Brooklyn synagogue like they were stepping on foreign soil. They'd never been to an Orthodox Syrian wedding, and you could tell from their faces, their foreheads crinkled, they were having a hard time accepting the idea of an 18-year-old getting married. Plus, the whole affair was kind of like Fiddler on the Roof, spiked with lifestyles of the rich and famous. A party for 800 people, where every woman in the room, regardless of age or religiosity, wore a skin-tight dress, size 2, and Christian Dior stilettos, dolled up like Barbie with long black hair. I was an exception, with light hair and fair skin, forever sticking out. A blonde, my mother always said, as if I were a foreign object in this house. Unbelievable. Tracy stood by my side. This is like the Twilight Zone. I can't believe you're getting married. Sadie, Sadie, married lady, Tracy sang the Barbra Streisand lyric as a tall waiter in a black tuxedo walked by. He smiled at her. Tracy cupped her hand over her mouth. He's cute, she whispered. He is. Tracy wagged a finger at me. There'll be no more of that, young lady. Bye-bye to the good old days, I said, realizing I didn't know how to behave around cute single boys anymore. Tracy smiled at her handsome waiter and took 2 shots of Arak off his silver tray. She handed me one. Drink up, she said. You're going to need this. I want to get married. I want to do this, I remember telling Tracy. But memory, like love, is fickle. It's true, I thought my life would unfold like a romance novel, one scintillatingly evocative chapter after another. When you're 18, you think your dreams are undeniable truths. At least I did. I had no clue my brain was still developing or that during my first year of marriage, I'd grow an inch. So, I didn't start out wanting to be a writer. I didn't know I wanted to be a writer till I was in my 30s. I was a teacher and I taught 4th and 5th grade. And while I was doing my graduate work, I was studying storytelling and how to use storytelling in the classroom. And I really came to fall in love with the idea of storytelling as a means for teaching. It was helping to cultivate empathy amongst my students, to get to know them better. It was a way to teach, a way to enlighten, to build bridges between different children with coming from different kinds of families. And when I had my 5th child and I was home and no longer teaching, I wanted to keep telling stories because I had done my thesis on storytelling and didn't want to stop doing that work. And so I took a class at Gotham Writers Workshop, a fiction class. And my teacher said to me after I wrote my first short story, she said, I think you have talent. You should go to Breadloaf. And I had never heard of Breadloaf, but I always like to stop there and just do a shout out for teachers. And there's one here tonight, one of my old teachers from Newman, because teachers are so important. And that teacher changed my life. And I did get accepted to Breadloaf and I went, and it was the beginning of deciding and discovering that I did want to continue writing. And it was a very slow process at first. I just wrote one short story at a time, not knowing if it was just a lucky break each time I got one published, or if this was really going to be a path I was going to pursue. After I'd written a bunch and then got a few published, I started to feel a little bit more comfortable. And I woke up one morning and said, I want to write a novel. I think I'm going to write a novel, thinking it was going to be the same as writing short stories. Some people find short story writing more difficult than novel writing, and some people find it the other way around. I was definitely one of those people. Short stories came somewhat naturally to me, and novel writing was much harder. And so The Marriage Box took me 20 years to write, which I mentioned earlier. I think there are a lot of reasons for that. Just the length, the sheer length, and having young children, I think made it very hard to grapple with such a big manuscript. I was working on my craft and that took time. But I think mostly because the story is so related to my real life, it took me a long time to be able to get some distance and not have my feelings be so raw. I also spent many, many years protecting my characters because they're the characters, the mother, the father, and my husband in the book are based on those real people in my life. And I needed to make sure that I was keeping them safe, and the character that's based on me as well. And so that's no fun to read. So it took me a very long time to start to let them not be perfect on the page. And once I made the character that's based on me do something that I didn't do and probably couldn't do, I made her a lot more reckless than I am. And that was kind of fun. And then once I did that, I was able to let the other characters misbehave as well. There's a lot in The Marriage Box about the difference of culture. So two things that are the same actually about growing up in New Orleans and the Syrian Jewish community are both are very focused around food is very big focus, good food, and parties. So we have that in common. So that wasn't such a big leap, but there was a lot of other things that were quite a leap. I went from being a Newman cheerleader and spending Friday nights at football games to having Shabbat dinner with my family. And there were just so many different opportunities so many different situations I found myself in that were very uncomfortable because I didn't know the rules. I hadn't been so prepared. My mom, when we got to New York, started making red beans and rice with hot dogs because we could buy kosher hot dogs. So it was basically hot dogs and red beans and rice. It was the kosher version of red beans and rice. But there were lots of rules around religion that I didn't know besides being kosher, keeping Shabbat, and it just felt very uncomfortable for a while. I also was put into a yeshiva, which coming from Newman and going into a yeshiva I was totally unprepared for that as well. So there was a lot of sadness at first, leaving behind my school, my family, my friends, and the adjustment was difficult. And I think that's why all those years later, probably 20 years after I had moved, I was still grappling with this material and starting to write this book. So a lot of what takes place in The Marriage Box doesn't exist today. The book takes place in 1980. Much has changed in the community. While girls still get married very young, they don't typically get married at 18 anymore. They didn't work in the 80s as much, and today they do. The community has evolved over time, just like every community. And I think that what was happening in the 80s and what takes place in The Marriage Box was just this snapshot of this very specific moment and time. And it looks very different today. The community was very wealthy then and small. And so they operated in a way that today just couldn't exist. People are much more religious. The community kind of split. So there's people who kind of present as I do, and there are people who are wearing wigs and skirts and yarmulkes and have a more, what you would think of as typically Orthodox look. I think I'm going to talk a little bit about what has been very important to me in writing The Marriage Box. Especially since October 7th, there's been a really strong sense of Jewish unity, and that's been nice. And doing these book talks has been especially lovely to go see thriving Jewish communities all over the country. And feeling that unity has been great. But I also think it's very important to recognize and acknowledge the diversity within the Jewish community. We're not just one thing, we're so many things. And Chimamanda Adichie has a TED Talk called The Danger of a Single Story. And she talks about the idea of when you represent a group of people in only one way, time and time again, you end up dehumanizing that group of people. And people come to rely on tropes, sometimes lies, dangerous generalizations. And that is, obviously hurtful to groups of people. And there are studies that show when somebody knows a Jewish person, or when somebody has studied Holocaust history, there's less anti-Semitism. So basically the idea is when you know a Jewish person, there might be more room for empathy or understanding and connection. And so anti-Semitism goes down. And I believe that writing and telling Jewish stories is a way for people to know the Jewish community, because we are from all over the world. We don't all look the same, whether we have dark hair or light hair, whether we are Ashkenazi, we're Sephardic, we are rich, we are poor, we are conservative, we are Orthodox. We don't all practice the same way or believe the same things. And I have been talking a lot about the importance of recognizing our diversity. And it's been a real gift to have the Marriage Box contribute to this conversation, even just in its tiny little way, because we don't have many stories about the Sephardic community, in particular the Syrian community. And this community has not historically been a community of artists. We were business people, when mostly. Now, again, like I said, things have changed. We do have more artists today, visual artists, decorators, writers, but there's not that much record keeping of our history, of who we are. And so I think it's important that we tell more stories. We have a long way to go, I think, as far as Jewish representation in film and books. And, just one example that comes to mind is this is in Life and Other Shortcomings. There's a short story, and the woman in the story goes to the mikveh, the ritual bath for women. And in my story, it talks about her taking off her nail polish before she goes into the bath. And the attendant who comes to check to make sure she's clean inspects her, and it goes into the details of what happens and why women go to that bath. And an editor that I sent the story to really liked the story, but said, I can't publish it because this fact that you have about nail polish isn't true. Orthodox women don't wear nail polish. And that is not true. So, different communities have taken on different ways of observing, and just having one singular lens of the way things are paints a false picture. And so I think the more stories we have, the better. And I've been thinking a lot too about the way Orthodox Judaism is represented, because I'm sure most of you know of Unorthodox, the book and the movie, and also My Unorthodox Life. And both of those are American shows that I think have somewhat grim premises. Even if they're based on real life, it's through a specific lens, and it shows Orthodox Judaism as restrictive and repressed. And I'm not here to tell you that it's not sometimes that, but I think the black and white thinking and having it only shown one way is the problem. So just for example, in my life, on Shabbat, I'll use my phone. My husband won't use his phone. He doesn't feel restricted by that. He thinks that's freedom. I would go crazy like that. That would not work for me. But that just goes to show too that we're different people with different needs and different beliefs. And to show it as, to show certain traditions or customs or practices as negative again and again, I do think it's problematic. There's this show that I avoid talking about because I can't say it properly, but Shtetl, yeah. So it's an Israeli show. And I think they do a much better job of really getting to the heart of the characters. And the characters are fleshed out. They're more nuanced and complex. They're not just like the expected trope. And I find that show to be does a much better job of cultivating empathy and letting you get to really know the characters. I wrote a piece one time, it's on my blog, and it was, I feel guilty writing about my flawed Jewish characters. And it's because of all that's going on in the world that, you know, I had to stop and think, am I putting fuel on the fire when I write about flawed Jewish characters? I happen to really like writing about the shadow side. I like the dark side. That's what interests me. And I make my characters do things that are less than admirable. But, you know, given where we are in the world, I question that. Now, in the end, what do I truly believe? I believe that we are all flawed. Every community has its good and its bad, and that, of course, we have to write our truth. I think that's ultimately what's most important. But all of these are questions that are coming up now in writers' minds, in Jewish writers' minds. Like we're really wondering about how to contribute to the conversation, and also tread carefully and honestly. So let me just check time. Okay, we're good. So a lot of times people have questions about patriarchy. I don't know how many of you read that Marriage Box, but patriarchy exists in the book. It exists in the Syrian community. And I always like to make sure to say it exists in America too. So I think I have experienced patriarchy since I'm a child in New Orleans, through my whole life, and not just in the Syrian community. But a lot of people have a lot of questions about that, because again, maybe the stereotypes don't lead to the most kind interpretation of those experiences. So there's so much we can talk about in the book, and I'd love to hear from you. I have a bunch of stories I can tell you, but I figured maybe if it's okay, we can start just asking questions and then go from there.
There's already a hand up in the back. I was gonna say, does anybody want to kick us off?
Yeah.
How was how were you and your book, this one in particular, received by the community?
I
Really?
should add one thing. I'm gonna just repeat your questions to the people on
Oh,
Zoom.
good.
The question was, how was the book and your story received by the people in your community? I picked up.
Really well. I don't know how many of you read the book, but hopefully it's humorous. I use humor, and I definitely wanted to shine a light on some things. I definitely wanted to say, here are some things we do. Let's take a look. What do we think? Do we want to keep doing these things? What has changed? What hasn't changed? Why? Like, just bring questions up. And I think we were able to have some great conversations around the book, so that was great. And they definitely were great supporters in the community. Bought the book, reviewed the book. We had book clubs all over. They were very supportive. I think they were really excited too and happy to have a writer amongst them. This year, it seems people are writing books, like in the last, and going forward, there are more people writing books, but really, we don't have a lot of authors. So I think they were excited about that.
So you said that you got married at 18. When did you go to college?
While I was married. It took me 6 years to get an undergraduate degree and another 6 years to get a graduate degree.
So you went to college while you were married. Did your husband have to go to college then as well?
He had already started and he didn't finish. He went to work. And he was older than I am.
So were you like pregnant when you were in college?
Yeah. Yeah.
Was that
Many times.
was that strange being around other students in that state?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely. But also I thought I was going to be so old when I graduated, when I was going to get my graduate degree. I'm going to be so old. I was 34. So everything I did it felt a little different. It felt a little removed, but I was determined to finish. I was determined. So
I'm gonna add on to that question. So the book is about a young woman
mhm.
with 4 children, and
Yeah.
then you wrote it after having children. How do you reflect on the parents that you wrote for Casey in the book as a parent?
How do I reflect of
On
her
Casey's
parents?
parents.
Uh-huh.
And I'm assuming there's something you borrowed from your own parents.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course. So I think Casey's parents are loving parents and well-intentioned parents. And I think they are also flawed. And they might have prepared her a little bit better. But and then again, it's such a complex, different world. Like, I don't know how prepared you could be without like actually living in it. There was just a lot to learn culturally, religiously, yeah, vocabulary, yeah. Yes, cooking, yes, it's true. The cooking was totally different. It's Mediterranean chicken and eggplant with allspice, as I mentioned in the book, and things like kibbeh and lahmacun and hamid, and we didn't eat all that stuff in New Orleans, some of it, but not all of it.
I really appreciated the universality that you described of being a young teenager living in New Orleans and your experiences, and some of the things I took with it. Then I'm going to ask the question was that, as from a parent's perspective, how much we never know about our child, or especially our teenager's life that goes on behind the scenes that we think we might know about. But I'm wondering where you got this idea that when Casey gets branded, I found that scene so hard to read and so immersive for me to be. I felt like I was in that experience, and I didn't want those terrible things to happen to Casey. So I'm wondering where that idea came from and how that developed for you.
That's a great question. That scene was very early on, like that was probably 20 years ago. I don't really remember exactly where it came from. But I will say, like, writers sometimes will use, let's say, ear piercing or blood brothers or a mark of some sort to, the scarlet letter, the A, or some way to symbol a bond and a connection, a scar. So, I mean, there was like the reference to a childhood scar or your childhood wounds or whatever your childhood experience might be, scar or not, it goes with you through your life. So Casey was going to take that with her through her, into her marriage and into her adulthood. And it also served to then be a secret from her husband, or then it served as a second point as well. Sometimes, honestly, this is what I love about writing. Sometimes something will come to me and I don't know where it comes from or why. And it's the most exciting feeling. And I would say that scene was probably one of those times.
Do you keep a journal or notebook or something on your nightstand, the things that you think of during the night?
I don't now, I don't. But I'll tell you what I did then when I started writing years ago. I don't know if any of you have ever read Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way. It's a great book. And it helps with any kind of creativity. It could be writing, but it could be songwriting. It could be visual arts, anything that you're interested in doing. She really helps open you up. And she recommends something called morning pages, which is 3 pages of longhand writing every day. And I did it religiously every morning for years and years. I had books and books and books. So it's not like I never had a piece of paper by my bedside. I did, but no. Somebody once said, but I don't believe this about the middle of the night because you probably could lose a good idea. But somebody once said that if you have an idea and you forget it, it's meant to be forgotten. And if it comes up for you again, you probably should use it.
How many years were you up in New York? Do you remember what it was like when you were able to come back to New Orleans for that first time?
For the first time.
Yeah, you went to New York.
Yeah.
How many years were there?
No, I came back. Oh, I was crying every day. I came back within a few months.
Okay.
Just to visit. It was hard. I was my junior and senior year. I was in New York. My friends were all together here. And so I would come. I even went to Destin one of the spring breaks. Like it was a very difficult transition. Yeah, not so easy.
Somebody online asks, how did you meet your husband? I think it was part of the conversation about your early marriage life and
Yeah.
growing connection.
So we met because his brother was dating my cousin. And they set us up on a blind date and we got married and they broke up.
We're at the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. How did you choose which Southern motifs, which Southern places you put in the book? Were they just your own experiences?
Yeah. I think it wasn't thought out or planned at all. It was just really what stood out in my mind.
Mhm.
Yeah. Same with Life and Other Shortcomings. Like I didn't think those stories take place in New York and New Orleans mostly. There's one story that takes place in Madrid. But all of them come from the one in Madrid happened while I was in Madrid. And the ones that take place in New Orleans really are just mostly memories.
Mhm.
Yeah. I got really lucky with 2 great settings to write about, New York and New Orleans. Rich in every way. Really lucky.
Was there any blowback in your family or your children? But similar enough that they remembered?
My children, they about where? Like different
I'm
enough?
not all the way through the book.
Oh, okay. So my kids, if anything, like this was a little bit of record keeping for them too. Like life in the community in the 80s looks different than today. And so they get to have a view of what it looked like then, what it was like for us then. And it seems like the real olden days. I mean, there were no cell phones. Yeah. So yeah, and the marriage box. Oh, I didn't talk about the title, the marriage box. So the reason the book is called The Marriage Box is because it was an actual place. And so the book has a double meaning. And the marriage box was a section behind the pool at a beach club we used to go to. And it's where the boys would hang out and the girls. And the point was not just to go to get a date. Really, the point was to find a spouse. It's a huge value in the community to marry. And it's not just for marriage. The real point is the continuation of the family. So even the parties, like the motive behind it is always like invite the young people, maybe they'll meet. That's how, because we don't have a marriage box anymore. But yeah, did you have a question?
Well, to your own personal story, do you think your parents impulsively, do you think they planned to move you to New York at a certain age? But they didn't seem to prepare you.
Right.
You went to a tutor and you didn't speak Hebrew. So they
True.
didn't prepare you for that.
Mm-hmm.
So was it an impulsive thing on their part? Do you think?
I mean, yes and no. So my parents were super young. My mom, when we moved, must have been, she was 36 when I got married. So she was 34. She had a 16-year-old. And my dad was probably not even 40. They both grew up in Brooklyn, and they always said one day they would go back. They talked about it, but they were really enjoying life here in New Orleans, and they were set. My father's business was here, and the years just went by kind of quickly. I was at Newman, like we had, thank God, a good life. And so there was no like immediate plan to go, and they didn't think, oh, when Corey's this age, we're going to go. I think what happened was they saw what the future. They saw I was thinking about college, and they saw what my older cousins were doing. And they realized they didn't want that for me. They wanted me back in the community, in community life, which at the time, was quite shocking. But even today, somebody asked me at one of these talks, like, how do your parents feel now? And I'm like, my father will say it's the best decision he ever made. He feels very proud of the fact that he made the move then. He loved life here. There was nothing, he just wanted a different life for his children. He wanted us to, and we're all together.
I remember the discussions with your father.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I want Corie to get married. I want her to go to college. She should go to college. We clapped so hard when you first met.
Oh, thank you.
That's what we did.
Thank you. Thank you.
What path did or do your children take?
All of them are in Brooklyn. My youngest is still in the city, but nearby. They're all nearby. It's like Midwood. They're all married and all have children now. So they're living a traditional life. I mean, they're modern. They participate in society, go to work and travel, but they're the basic values of the community are family, being together, and they're doing that. But I was never the type to insist on anything. Really what they wanted to do would have been fine with me.
I'm only halfway through, so.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember. Did both of your parents grow up in the community, or was one of them Ashkenazi?
So both grew up in the community, but my mother's parents, one was Sephardic,
Parents did.
my mother's parents, and one is Ashkenaz. So I did have that influence from my grandmother, who I adored. I adored her. And my Syrian grandmother had passed. That's grandma Rose, yeah. And the Syrian grandmother, my real Syrian grandmother had passed away before I was born. And I do believe if she was alive, I think things might have been different. I think I would have had more of a connection to the community.
I actually find it surprising that if they grew up in the community, that you didn't know anything about that until 16.
Yeah, well, 14. We went to New Jersey for the
But you
first
didn't
time.
know Spend summers? Or
14.
not about
14.
then, though?
Yeah.
That's when you need to be looked at as married.
I don't even know that they were thinking that then, honestly. I think,
I think it's conscious thought. I think it's just the way. of
it could be, but that was my first introduction at 14. And yeah, I think if my Syrian grandmother had been alive, she probably would have cooked with me or told me stories. And my parents were just, like I said, they were young and really enjoying life here in New Orleans. And I don't think they realized how fast time was going and that the connection was being lost, that it wasn't going to pass down to my siblings and myself. So I think it was like they did kind of wake up one day and decide, oh, we got to go. My little sister was 2. She was much younger. Yeah, so she grew up in the community.
So that's all.
Yeah. Yeah. Even Jack, so I was the oldest, 16. Moving your junior year is no fun. My brother was going to be a freshman, but that wasn't as bad. And it was like a natural transition time. And my little sister was 2. So I definitely was the one who kicked and screamed the most.
And how to track acclimate to the community was easier because he was high and there wasn't as much pressure on him to get married. He liked the community.
I think he did. Yeah. 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 He definitely didn't have the anger, sadness thing. You know, he wasn't as emotional about the whole thing as I was, for sure.
Remember his wedding? How many rabbis?
I don't know. I don't remember. But
My son Judd and Mandy were at Threshold Nurses.
oh, wow. And then she left. Yeah. Yeah.
In the community now.
Who? Yeah, Mandy does. Yeah, and
Um,
her kids.
oh. One of the questions I had was about your brother in the book, and it sounds like, you know, brother in real life, and I didn't realize you had a sister. But is there a character in the book that you would want to follow more? Is there a story that you want to get deeper in?
So yeah, so couple of days after the marriage box came out, somebody had said, you should write a sequel. And I was like, no, never. This project kills me. Never, never. And then 2 days later, I found myself thinking about it. And since it's really like in my head. And the answer is yes. Like I think I'm trying not to give any giveaways. But what happened at the end could be viewed as a typical move of our protagonist. And it's also a nice springboard for a continuation. And yeah, so definitely, yeah, a lot of the characters.
Excited to see what's next.
Yeah, so I'm definitely thinking about a sequel for sure. For sure.
I think we have time for just a few more questions, 1 or 2 more questions, and we can say goodbye to our friends on Zoom and then continue conversations in our museum store during book signings. Does anybody have?
How did you get an agent? Because every story is sort of nobody wants this, they'll say, or nobody wants that. What was that process for you?
Torturous, pretty much. But you just have to find the right one. We actually parted ways, but I did have one at one point. It's the publishing industry right now, I think, is really tough. And I mean, you could have a great agent and still she might not be able to sell your book. You know, you write something that she doesn't like. It's hard. But the good news is, while traditional publishing is, I think, super difficult. There are so many more options now that didn't exist 20 years ago. So I have a friend who works with Amazon. It's their, it's not self-publishing, but it's Amazon Publishing, I think. And she sells tons of books. She's really successful. There are hybrid publishers, there are small presses, there are university presses. There's a lot of desire from readers to read books done published in an independent way, because the traditional publishers are put in such a box of what they can accept and what they can't accept, that I think it's making what gets published less interesting. And so readers are finding their own ways to find the kind of books that they like.
The book is being taught, sort of like a multicultural thing in public schools. Have you gotten any word on that? You know.
My book, this
Yeah.
book, that would be lovely. Oh, that's so nice. Thank you. Well, that's a dream and a goal. And as a teacher, like, I would love that. I would love it to be used in yeshivas too, but I don't think they're there yet. I did for a minute consider watering it down or taking out some parts so that it could be used in that way. But I just couldn't do it. So I figured readers will find it anyway. But yeah, that's a goal and a wish for sure.
Keep moving.
That's the hope.
Question about the marriage box itself, you said it, so was that like a slang version of it, that's what the young people refer to it as, or was it truly within the adults, the community
No.
and everything?
It was slang.
Okay.
It was like, oh, she's in the marriage box, or she's hanging out in the marriage box. And I was like, I'm not going near that place.
Like we at the beach, like going to Destin, we're hanging out in a certain way with our hair in a ponytail, no makeup, flip flops.
Right.
What did it look? I saw it, so I.
Right, right.
It was
I mean,
terrifying.
Yes, it was.
So
That's another thing that's changed. Like now, it's not that looking good isn't a value, but it's not in that way. Like I think in the 80s, in many ways, the community was finding their way in American society. And maybe they overdid things now and then, like trying to fit in or to find their way. So I just remember I remember that whole era, that time you go to a party, you'd go to the marriage box or whatever, and everyone was in gold lame or fringe. And I was just like, it was foreign to us. But it's not like that anymore. I mean, it can be. I'm not saying nobody likes fringe or gold lame. But there's less, it's less maybe ostentatious, less flashy, maybe. Or maybe I just got used to it. I don't know.
well, when your girls were growing up, did they experience that?
Yeah, I mean, if anything,
Stiletto feels at the pool?
if anything, like I'm exaggerating when I say resentment, but like if anything, they have a lot of a resentment to me that like I did not play that game. Like they always had what they needed, but I didn't really encourage them to compete or to look a certain way or so now that they're getting older, they don't have that angst around it anymore. But when they were teenagers, they were mad. I mean, teenagers want what other teenagers have. And, if somebody was going to buy their daughter a super expensive designer or something, I wasn't going to do it.
Mm.
So, yeah, it's changing now, I think. Again, things are changing. But I think that having a designer, something meant something to maybe people in the community as they were establishing themselves and trying to be part of American society in a certain way. So it's always been like a balance of holding on to the traditions and the culture and fitting in.
And with that, I hate to do this. We as the folks in the room can continue having conversations, but I'm just gonna pop in front of the camera.
Okay.
The folks online, we're gonna say good night to all of you. And if you would like to buy, and now I'm just gonna talk to them, sorry guys. If you would like to buy your copy of The Marriage Box or Life for Other Shortcomings, please visit our museum store, msjestore.org. And you can purchase your copy. I also want to thank Corie for being with us today, for sharing your story, sharing your process and so much of your life with us. I really appreciate it. We're interested to hear from everybody. So if you have any comments or questions, ideas, whatever about our programming here at the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience, we're a new shop and we are excited to continue to bring you the programs that you want to see. So if you have an idea or comment or question, let me know and you can reach me at lizzie@msje.org, or if you're in person, you can find me. Keep up to date on our newsletters. It's the best way to know about what programs are coming up. Next week, we are showing the film Rosenwald, which is in part partnership, I guess, with our special exhibition upstairs. In 2 weeks, we are having a program called Corresponding Angles in honor of International Holocaust Remembrance Day, about a doctor and his patient and their special connection they found related to their families during the Holocaust, and a plethora of other programs. So please keep up to date with all of our newsletters. It's the best way to know what's happening. A recording of today's presentation will be available on YouTube in the coming days. So thank you all for being here on Zoom, and thank you so much, Corie, for sharing your story and time with us. That I'm gonna say.